Welcome back to Vietnamese Case Files. In today's compilation video, we will take you through 6 tragic major criminal cases, painting a dark portrait of crime and the hidden corners within the Vietnamese community in the United States. From the cross-continental escape of a California shooting suspect to cold-blooded executions carried out at a cemetery or inside a bustling restaurant, each case leaves a haunting reminder of the cruelty of the perpetrators. There are mothers who collapsed while praying for their children, and young women who lost their lives simply for standing up to protect a friend from domestic violence. Among them, some offenders have paid for their crimes behind bars, while other cases have remained unsolved for decades due to lack of evidence, leaving an irreplaceable void in immigrant families. And if you enjoy investigative true crime content and want to follow along with Vietnamese case files and upcoming cases, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss a single episode. Now, let's begin. On the afternoon of July 5th, 2025, the emergency hotline in the city of Stanton, Orange County, California, received a flood of panicked calls reporting a shooting in broad daylight. According to witnesses, 2 teenagers had been struck by gunfire and collapsed along the roadside. The incident occurred in the 11000 block of Court Street, near the intersection with Plaza Way, north of the Little Saigon area. Orange County police were immediately dispatched to the scene. Upon arrival, officers found both victims in critical condition. The scene was chaotic, with blood splattered across the sidewalk and several spent shell casings scattered around, indicating that the suspect had fired at close range. Local residents in the surrounding area, after regaining their composure, rushed out to provide first aid and share information with authorities. Many recalled hearing a car speeding away immediately after the gunshots, but no one was able to see the license plate or identify the perpetrator, as everything happened far too quickly. Both victims were rushed to the hospital for emergency treatment. However, one of the teenage boys succumbed to his severe injuries. The remaining victim was fortunate to survive after surgery and gradually stabilized in the days that followed. While waiting for the victim to recover, the investigative team also moved quickly to collect evidence at the scene. Based on the positions of the shell casings and the angles of bullet impacts on the wall of a nearby residence, police determined that at the time of the shooting, there were at least 2 different firing directions. This sign suggested there may have been more than one assailant. In addition, investigators discovered that a stray bullet nearly flew into a nearby apartment. This detail made the incident even more serious, because the perpetrator not only took a life, but also fired recklessly into a residential area, providing sufficient grounds to add an additional charge of shooting into an occupied dwelling. In the early stage of the investigation, the police's top priority was to determine the victims' identities. From several personal items recovered at the scene, authorities identified the teenager who did not survive as Samuel Louis Vidal, who was 15 at the time of the attack. The injured boy was identified as Anthony Gomez, only 13. This information was officially confirmed after Anthony underwent surgery and regained consciousness. The families of both Vidal and Anthony stated that neither boy had ever received threats or had any personal conflicts beforehand. The victims appeared to be completely unfamiliar with the criminal underworld of organized groups. This made the case even more puzzling, because if there was no prior dispute, why would 2 teenagers become the targets of such a brazen attack? Investigators began to suspect that they might have been mistaken for members of some organization, or that they were simply unlucky bystanders swept into a confrontation that had nothing to do with them. To answer those questions, investigators started digging deeper into the circumstances of the incident based on the account of the surviving witness, Anthony. After his condition stabilized, he described in detail the terrifying moments he and his friend had endured. According to Anthony, that afternoon, the 2 boys were sitting on the sidewalk outside an apartment complex on Court Street when a black car, luxurious in style, slowed down and stopped near them. Anthony said there were several masked men inside, filling the seats. From the back seat, one person got out and walked toward the 2 boys. He was dressed in dark clothing and wore a full mask, so Anthony could not see his face, only that he was tall and thin. He approached and abruptly asked in a blunt tone, "Are you gang members?" Caught off guard, Vidal and Anthony awkwardly replied that they were not part of any gang, and in fact that was true. But before they could even finish their answer, the masked man suddenly pulled a weapon hidden inside his clothing and repeatedly aimed and fired at the 2 boys. Terrified, Anthony instinctively turned to run, but was immediately hit and collapsed onto the sidewalk. At the same time, another person sitting in the front passenger seat of the car also extended a gun out of the window and continued firing at the victims. In that split second of chaos, Anthony still managed to tilt his head to the other side and saw his friend, Vidal, lying motionless where he fell. Just seconds later, the assailant got back into the car. The vehicle immediately sped away from the scene, leaving the two children motionless on the ground. The entire attack lasted less than a minute, so fast that no one had time to react. The surviving victim's account and the statements from witnesses at the scene matched one another, indicating that the perpetrators were a group of masked men traveling in a Mercedes-Benz. But who were they really, and why would they target two boys who had nothing to do with the criminal world? These unanswered questions only strengthened law enforcement's determination to solve the case, ushering in an extremely challenging phase of investigation. Immediately after the crime occurred, the homicide detail of the Orange County Police Department was fully mobilized. In addition, the gang unit of the Orange County District Attorney's Office also joined in to support the investigation. Based on the initial data, police focused their inquiry on criminal organizations. The Stanton area, where the incident took place, had long seen conflicts among certain street gangs. However, the suspect's characteristics described by Anthony did not closely match the Latin gangs commonly seen in the area. As a result, another hypothesis emerged. This might not have been a local, internal conflict, but rather a gang from elsewhere coming to Stanton to look for members of a rival faction living there. In other words, it was very likely that Samuel Vidal and Anthony Gomez were mistaken for local gang members, making them targets for the unknown attackers. With that hypothesis, investigators implemented a series of investigative measures to trace the suspicious vehicle. First, surveillance cameras around the scene were retrieved and reviewed carefully. Through this, police found a blurry video clip showing a black car speeding away from the area immediately after the shooting. Notably, the rear license plate had been obscured in that footage. This indicated the group had prepared very carefully before committing the crime. However, investigators did not stop there. They continued leveraging traffic camera systems and automated license plate readers installed along major routes. Using data from this system, police traced the black vehicle's escape route. After leaving the scene, the attackers drove a few blocks away and removed the covering from the license plate, likely believing they were already in a safe area. The moment the real plate was exposed, roadside cameras captured the information of the Mercedes-Benz clearly. After a quick search in the motor vehicle registration database, police identified the black Mercedes-Benz with that license plate as being registered to a young man named Troy Quang Lu, who lived in Garden Grove, Orange County, not far from Stanton. Garden Grove is known for its large Vietnamese community, and it has also previously been associated with activity by Asian criminal groups. Immediately, investigators quietly set up surveillance around this suspect's residence in Garden Grove, and they also obtained a court order to monitor Lu's mobile phone signals. Location data analysis showed that at exactly midday on July 5th, 2025, Troy Quang Lu's phone was present in Stanton, perfectly matching the time and location of the shooting. This was a crucial piece of technical evidence confirming he was at the scene when the gunfire erupted. With such clear evidence, an emergency arrest warrant for Troy Quang Lu was issued. Just a few hours after the incident, tactical units raided his home in Garden Grove and took him into custody. When confronted by law enforcement, Troy Quang Lu appeared shaken but not overly surprised. Perhaps he knew it was only a matter of time before police traced his vehicle. He was immediately transported to headquarters for interrogation. According to the suspect's statement, there were a total of 5 people in the car that day. He claimed he was the driver, and the others were Ali Ibrahim Al-Suki, Danny Huyen, Viet Quoc-Bao, and an unidentified person whom Ali had brought along. Lu also asserted that Danny Huyen and Quoc-Bao were the ones who directly opened fire. In fact, Ali Ibrahim Al-Suki had already been on investigators' radar because a security camera at an intersection captured footage of Lu's Mercedes stopping at a house in Garden Grove before heading to Stanton. That house was Ali's residence. Combined with the driver's statement, authorities had grounds to believe Ali Ibrahim Al-Suki was the ringleader, who had invited his accomplices to his home to discuss the plan. Less than 24 hours after the incident, the identities of the key suspects were clearly established. Ali Ibrahim Al-Suki was identified as the mastermind, Danny Huyen and Viet Quoc-Bao as the shooters, and Troy Quang Lu as the driver. In addition, investigators noted a 5th suspect whose identity remained unknown, believed to be a friend of Ali who also participated in the plan. Orange County police quickly deployed forces to capture the remaining suspects. Danny Huynh was apprehended at his home on the night of July 6, 2025, without any chance to resist. Notably, at the time of his arrest, authorities also found that he was storing a firearm inside the house. Because he had previously been convicted of a felony, possessing a weapon was illegal. Police suspected this firearm could have been one of the weapons used in the attack, so it was immediately sent for forensic testing to compare with the shell casings recovered at the scene. In a separate development, when authorities raided Ali Ibrahim al-Suki's residence, he had already disappeared. Ali's family said they did not know where he went, only providing that he held a Jordanian passport and frequently traveled to the Middle East to visit relatives. This raised concerns that the suspected mastermind may have fled abroad as soon as he learned that his accomplices had been arrested. However, the biggest surprise for investigators was the move made by Viet Quoc-Bao, one of the two alleged shooters named in Liu's statement. After Danny Huynh was arrested, police immediately searched for Quoc-Bao, but he had vanished completely. He was no longer at his usual residence address in Orange County. Bao's relatives were fairly cooperative and provided information suggesting that he may have returned to Vietnam to visit family just days after the incident. At first, investigators were skeptical, but after checking with U.S. immigration authorities, they were stunned to discover that Viet Quoc-Bao had boarded a flight from Los Angeles to Hong Kong on July 9, 2025, just 4 days after the shooting in Stanton. From Hong Kong, he continued on a connecting flight to Ho Chi Minh City and entered Vietnam later that same day. The fact that the two main suspects fled overseas immediately after the crime completely changed the course of the investigation. The Orange County District Attorney's Office understood that to bring the suspects to justice, they would need close coordination with federal agencies such as the FBI, as well as law enforcement in the countries where the suspects were located. Therefore, in October 2025, the District Attorney's Office formally requested the FBI to get involved and launch an international manhunt for Viet Quoc-Bao and Ali al-Suki. After receiving the report, FBI Los Angeles quickly coordinated with the Orange County Police Department and the District Attorney's Organized Crime Unit to prepare wanted case files and work with overseas counterparts. After confirming that Viet Quoc-Bao had gone to Vietnam and Ali al-Suki had gone to Jordan, the FBI began coordinating with law enforcement in both countries to track down the suspects. Among the two, the case of Viet Quoc-Bao was considered more likely to result in an arrest, due to the increasingly strong security cooperation between the United States and Vietnam in recent years. By contrast, Ali al-Suki's case was more complicated due to legal procedures. Moreover, Ali held Jordanian nationality and could potentially receive protection from the host country. Despite these difficulties, U.S. authorities remained persistent and did not give up on pursuing either suspect. In Vietnam, through the U.S. Embassy and official communication channels, the FBI sent a request for assistance to the relevant authorities under the Ministry of Public Security. All information related to Viet Quoc-Bao, including photographs, fingerprints, and his U.S. passport, was fully shared with the Vietnamese side. By mid-January 2026, good news arrived for the task force when Viet Quoc-Bao was finally captured. Specifically, on January 14th, the FBI announced that Vietnamese authorities had arrested Viet Quoc-Bao in Ho Chi Minh City at the request of the United States. The operation was carried out swiftly and in strict secrecy to prevent the suspect from detecting the pursuit and disappearing deeper inland. After Bao was arrested, procedures to return him to the United States were quickly initiated. In a short period of time, effective coordination between the FBI and Vietnamese authorities completed all necessary paperwork. On January 21, 2026, a commercial flight departed from Ho Chi Minh City under special security supervision. Viet Quoc-Bao was escorted throughout the journey back to the United States by FBI personnel and judicial police officers. When the plane landed in Los Angeles, FBI agents and officers from U.S. Customs and Border Protection were already waiting to take custody. Viet Quoc-Bao was officially booked into the Orange County Jail later that same day, January 21, 2026, bringing an end to his 6-month run as a fugitive. As for Ali Ibrahim al-Suki, as of now, he has not yet been arrested. Intelligence sources indicate that Ali may be hiding in his home country or in nearby areas in the Middle East. The Orange County District Attorney's Office has also formally charged Ali with conspiracy to commit murder, but negotiations with Jordan may take a long time. The United States has stated it will continue making every effort to locate Ali and bring him to justice. Meanwhile, the fifth accomplice, whose identity remains unknown, continues to be a major unanswered question. It is highly likely that only when the ringleader, Ali, is captured will clues about this individual finally come to light. After Viet Quoc-Bao was successfully arrested and brought back to Orange County, judicial proceedings against the defendants in the case moved forward rapidly. On January 26, 2026, the Orange County District Attorney's Office announced it had finalized the indictment against Viet Quoc-Bao on multiple serious charges, including first-degree murder, attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and one count of shooting into a crowded area. There were also aggravating factors, such as using a weapon that caused severe injury or death, knowing that accomplices were armed, and personally using a weapon during the commission of the crime. With this slate of allegations, if convicted, Viet Quoc-Bao could face a minimum sentence of 50 years in prison before being eligible for parole. This is effectively a life sentence, ensuring he would spend most of his remaining life behind bars. Bauer's first court appearance took place on January 27, 2026, at the Orange County Superior Court's West Justice Center, the same venue where his accomplices Troy Liu and Danny Huynh had their preliminary hearings. The prosecution, led by Deputy District Attorney Kara Thompson of the Gang Unit, asked the court to deny bail for Bauer. That request was granted, as the court found the risk of flight to be extremely high. In subsequent hearings, Troy Quang Liu and Danny Huynh were also brought before the court. Both were charged with murder, attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and shooting into an occupied dwelling. Huynh additionally faced a charge of illegal firearm possession due to his prior felony record. The maximum sentence Troy Liu could face is life in prison, with at least 25 years before parole eligibility. Meanwhile, Danny Huynh also faced a minimum sentence of 50 years similar to Barr, because he was alleged to have been one of the direct shooters, while Troy Liu was considered a secondary accomplice as the driver. The preliminary trial is expected to take place in late 2026 or in 2027. At that time, Viet Quoc-Bao, Danny Huynh, and Troy Liu will be tried together for the same criminal conduct. In the face of strong evidence, the defense strategy will most likely be to negotiate a plea deal in exchange for reduced sentences. If the defendants agree to plead guilty to certain charges, prosecutors may recommend lighter penalties. However, as of now, there has been no information indicating that any agreement has been reached. District Attorney Todd Spitzer has taken a very firm stance, arguing that direct perpetrators like Bao and Huynh should receive the maximum punishment as a deterrent. This hardline approach could make bargaining difficult unless they agree to cooperate by providing information about the unidentified fifth suspect or assist authorities in tracking down Ali al-Suchi. At present, the local community, especially the family of the victim, Samuel Vidal, is eagerly awaiting an appropriate verdict to restore justice for the deceased. The case involving Viet Quoc-Bao and his accomplices not only shocked Orange County but also spread widely across overseas Vietnamese communities. The fact that a young Vietnamese man allegedly committed a horrific killing and then tried to flee back to his homeland became a hot topic across many forums. US media also reported extensively on the case, emphasizing the international cooperation involved in solving it. This has been viewed as a victory for the rule of law, sending a powerful message that no matter where a suspect runs, justice will follow. This case is similar to several past incidents in which the United States and Vietnam coordinated to return fugitives to face prosecution. Notably, in 2020, Vietnam transferred 2 US citizens who had been hiding in Ho Chi Minh City and Vung Tau back to the United States. Meanwhile, the case still contains unusual details that have not been fully clarified, such as the identity of the fifth suspect. Who is he, and what exactly was his role in this incident? To this day, there is still no answer. In addition, Ali al-Suchi's precise motive for masterminding the attack also remains unclear. Was this merely a case of mistaken identity, or was there something else behind it? In the early morning hours of October 24, 2015, the 911 dispatch center in South San Jose received an emergency report of multiple gunshots fired from the parking lot in front of Lou Beer Club and Restaurant located at 1595 Monterey Highway. When police officers and paramedics arrived at the scene, they found a man in his 30s in critical condition with multiple gunshot wounds. The victim had collapsed on the sidewalk directly outside the bar. Despite immediate life-saving efforts by emergency personnel, the victim was ultimately pronounced dead at the scene due to the severity of his injuries. Under the flashing lights of patrol vehicles, the parking lot outside Lou Beer Club and Restaurant presented a scene both chilling and heartbreaking. Crime scene investigators determined that at least 3 to 6 shots had been fired, with multiple handgun shell casings scattered across the asphalt. Preliminary observations indicated that the victim had been struck primarily in the upper body. In addition, the shell casings were scattered in a straight line along the roadway, leading authorities to believe that the shooter may have fired from a moving vehicle passing by, aiming directly at a low-position target. Based on identification documents recovered at the scene, police quickly identified the victim as Michael Arcega, 34 years old. According to gathered information, he was of Filipino descent, born in Manila and raised in Hawaii. To friends and family, Michael was described as a kind-hearted man, cheerful and exceptionally generous. Perhaps his youth, shaped by the distinctive aloha spirit of Hawaii, had formed a Michael who was warm, welcoming, and who treated everyone around him like family. More than 10 years earlier, he moved to California to attend Notre Dame de Namur University in Belmont, and later chose the San Francisco Bay Area to build his long-term career. By 2015, Michael had joined the San Carlos branch of Keller Williams Realty and quickly established his professional reputation. With his friendly smile and professional work ethic, he easily won the trust and admiration of both clients and colleagues. Notably, a colleague shared that at the time, Michael had just closed his first real estate deal and was extremely excited about this new milestone in his career. Alongside a flourishing career, Michael also had a loving and happy family life. He was a devoted husband and father who always placed his wife and children first. His sister Christina shared that the entire family had been planning a trip back to the Philippines within the next 2 weeks to relax together after Michael's hard work. Yet no one could have imagined that the long-awaited family reunion would never come to pass. Michael's presence in San Jose that night seemed like a cruel twist of fate. On the evening of October 23, 2015, he and a group of friends went to Lou Beer Club and Restaurant to celebrate a friend's birthday, as well as to mark his own first professional achievement. It was supposed to be a night filled with joy and laughter, but tragedy struck when Michael decided to leave early because he had plans to take his son out the next morning. He stepped onto the sidewalk in front of the bar and called a nearby friend to pick him up, as he had consumed a few drinks. Tragically, in that very moment, Michael Arcega had no idea that danger was closing in, and just minutes later, his life would be ended by an unseen gunman in the darkness. As soon as the victim's identity was confirmed, the San Jose Police Department devoted its full resources to solving the shocking case. However, investigators initially faced immense difficulties, as the crime scene yielded almost no significant clues. Ironically, a security camera at a neighboring business, which could have captured the entire incident, malfunctioned at that exact time. In response, a homicide task force composed of the department's most experienced detectives was assembled to meticulously reconstruct the scene. They carefully marked each shell casing, analyzed bullet trajectories, and searched for any suspicious traces on nearby walls or parked vehicles. In the early stages of the investigation, detectives examined every possible motive by thoroughly reviewing Michael Arcega's personal life. From checking his phone records to examining his personal computer, they searched for any recent threats or conflicts. Yet the findings only deepened the mystery, as Michael had led an exemplary life. He had no debts, no complicated romantic entanglements, and no notable business disputes. Family members and friends firmly stated that no one harbored hatred toward him strong enough to commit such a brutal act. This effectively ruled out the theory of personal conflict. Detectives also considered the possibility of a robbery, but Michael's wallet and personal belongings were still intact at the scene, making that theory unconvincing as well. Ultimately, a more disturbing possibility emerged. Could this have been a random attack? If so, it would represent a terrifying threat, suggesting that anyone could become an innocent victim like Michael. At the same time, police collected statements from witnesses who had been at the bar on the night of the shooting. Dozens of interviews were conducted with employees, security staff, patrons, and residents living in the surrounding area. However, most witnesses stated that they only managed to hear the gunshots before immediately fleeing in panic, and none were able to identify the shooter. Due to the lack of direct evidence at the scene, investigators decided to shift their focus to electronic data sources. They began thoroughly reviewing traffic camera systems along nearby roads in an effort to track vehicles leaving the area around 2 a.m. that morning. hours of blurry surveillance footage were reviewed repeatedly by detectives to ensure that no detail was overlooked. Eventually, their persistence paid off. A camera on Monterey Road, located only a few hundred meters from the crime scene, captured footage of a vehicle speeding through an intersection shortly after the shooting occurred. Although the image quality was poor, investigators believed it appeared to be a dark-colored sedan, with the license plate unreadable. At the same time, technical investigators extracted mobile phone data from the area during the time frame of the homicide. They compiled a list of phone numbers that had connected to cell towers near Monterey Highway between 1:50 a.m. and 2 a.m. on October 24th. Among hundreds of numbers belonging to local residents and rideshare drivers operating nearby, police paid special attention to two unfamiliar phone numbers that were not registered to residents of San Jose. Further investigation revealed that one number was registered in Oakland and the other in Hayward. Notably, both numbers connected to a cell tower near the crime scene at approximately 1:54 a.m., the precise time the shooting occurred, and shortly thereafter moved out of the coverage area. This critical discovery raised suspicions that the two subscribers might have belonged to the perpetrators fleeing the scene. Investigators immediately pursued this promising lead. Records showed that the first number belonged to a 19-year-old man named Nathan Nai Fong Seichow, residing in Oakland. The second number was registered to Minh Do Van Trun, 29 years old, residing in Hayward. The investigative team then began covertly monitoring the activities of these two individuals for several weeks. Through physical surveillance and intelligence gathering, police gradually developed clearer profiles of the suspects. According to findings, Nathan Nai Fong Seichow was a young man in Oakland who frequently associated with local troublemakers. Meanwhile, Minh Do Van Trun, though older, appeared no better off. He was unemployed and was often seen at casinos or illegal gaming establishments in the East Bay area. After nearly 7 months of relentless investigation and the collection of substantial circumstantial evidence, arrest warrants for the two suspects were officially approved by the Santa Clara County Court in early May 2016. The task force immediately convened to plan the arrests carefully, fully aware that the suspects might be armed and potentially dangerous. A tactical unit, working in coordination with the Oakland Police Department, quietly approached Nathan Nai Fong Seichow's residence in East Oakland and swiftly apprehended him at his home without significant resistance. Just a few days later, authorities turned their attention to the second suspect. San Jose police tracked down Minh Do Van Trun and discovered that he was hiding at an acquaintance's house in San Jose after learning of his accomplice's arrest. When the tactical team surrounded the residence, Minh Do Van Trun attempted to flee but was forced to back down in the face of overwhelming police presence. Ultimately, he surrendered and was handcuffed on the front porch, leaving onlookers stunned. Immediately following their arrests, both suspects were booked into the Santa Clara County Jail as part of the homicide investigation. On May 16, 2016, the San Jose Police Department officially announced the arrests of Nathan Nai Fong Seichow and Minh Do Van Trun, sending shockwaves through the community. Upon hearing the news, Michael's family and friends felt a sense of relief, hopeful that justice was finally within reach. However, the pursuit of the full truth did not end there. Investigators shifted their focus to reviewing and consolidating all evidence in order to prepare a comprehensive case for prosecution. To build the most complete and accurate picture possible, detectives meticulously cross-referenced multiple sources of data, including witness statements, the suspect's movements on the night of the crime, and relevant forensic findings. Based on the collected evidence, prosecutors filed formal charges against Nathan Nai Fong Seichow and Minh Do Van Trun for firearm-related offenses resulting in death. However, when appearing in court, both defendants exercised their right to remain silent upon the advice of counsel and firmly pleaded not guilty. Notably, up to this point, the specific motive behind the killing of Michael Arcega has not been officially confirmed by authorities in the media. Because the suspects have remained silent and investigators have released very limited information, many unanswered questions surrounding the case still persist. After the case file was completed, the Santa Clara County District Attorney's Office decided to try Nathan Nai Fong Seichow first, separating his case from that of Minh Do Van Trun. Seichow's trial officially began in the fall of 2017 and quickly drew significant public attention. Michael's family and friends were present in large numbers, closely following every development in the courtroom. In court, prosecutors presented a comprehensive narrative of the case, asserting that Saigon and his accomplice had driven from Oakland to San Jose on the night of October 23, 2015, and that Saigon was the one who directly fired the shots that killed Michael Arcega. To support this argument, they introduced key evidence, including cell phone location data and traffic camera footage. Additionally, the close relationship between Saigon and Minh Do Van Tron, who owned a vehicle matching witness descriptions, was presented as a crucial link in the prosecution's case. Prosecutors emphasized the senseless and brutal nature of the act, arguing that it constituted first-degree murder with premeditation, even though the precise motive remained unclear. However, Saigon's defense team did not concede ground. They quickly identified what they considered the biggest weakness in the prosecution's case: the absence of direct evidence. In fact, no eyewitness testified to seeing Saigon pull the trigger, nor were his fingerprints or DNA found at the scene. Even the firearm recovered could not be definitively confirmed as the murder weapon, as forensic results contained unresolved uncertainties. Based on this, the defense proposed an alternative theory: that a criminal gang may have carried out the shooting and used spoofed or misleading phone data to divert investigators. After more than 2 weeks of tense proceedings and deliberations, the jury ultimately reached its verdict. To the shock and heartbreak of the victim's family, the judge announced that Nathan Nai Phong Saigon was acquitted of all charges related to the death of Michael Arcega. The primary reason was that the existing evidence was not sufficient to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Following the conclusion of the trial, several jurors shared that although they personally harbored suspicions about Saigon's involvement, the law demands precision and compelling evidence. Because the case relied largely on circumstantial evidence and lacked direct physical proof, the jurors felt compelled to acquit the defendant in order to uphold the integrity of the judicial process. As for Minh Do Van Tron, after Saigon was acquitted, prosecutors soon realized that their chances of convicting him had become even more fragile. In fact, the evidence against Minh was considerably weaker than that presented against Saigon. As a result, in November 2017, prosecutors quietly withdrew all charges and decided not to bring his case to trial. After spending more than a year in custody awaiting court proceedings, the suspect was ultimately released, leaving the public stunned. In the end, no one was held legally accountable for the wrongful death of Michael Arcega. The conclusion of the trial left a profound gap in justice that remains difficult to reconcile to this day. A representative of the district attorney's office later told the press that while they respected the jury's verdict, they were deeply disappointed by the outcome. Authorities also urged anyone with additional leads or new evidence related to the case to come forward so that the truth could once again be brought to light. For the Arcega family, the verdict was an overwhelming shock. They felt devastated and disillusioned as they watched the individuals suspected of killing their loved one walk free from the courtroom. The pain of losing a husband, father, and brother was compounded by the reality that justice for Michael remained unresolved. Following the verdict, public opinion was divided. Many expressed frustration with the justice system, believing that Nathan Nai Phong Saigon and Minh Do Van Tron were involved in the crime but were acquitted due to insufficient direct evidence. Others argued that the jury had fulfilled its duty appropriately, acknowledging the possibility that the two suspects may not have been involved at all. Regardless of perspective, most people felt deep sympathy for Michael Arcega's family, who may never receive complete answers about their loss. In your view, were Nathan Nai Phong Saigon and Minh Do Van Tron truly responsible for this crime? If not, then who killed Michael Arcega and where might that person be now? At 11:05 p.m. on the night of October 5th, 2022, the 911 dispatch center in Houston received a flood of emergency calls. Everyone on the other end of the line was extremely panicked, reporting a gun attack at Tai Loi restaurant at 1232 Au Bel Air Bielved. Through the screams and chaos over the phone, the dispatcher tried to calm the witnesses and immediately sent officers to the scene. Just minutes later, patrol cars from the Houston Police Department raced to the reported location with sirens blaring. When officers arrived, the area was eerily quiet because all the patrons had already fled before police could get there. Inside the restaurant, officers found several kitchen staff and servers huddled in a corner, faces drained and stunned. That was easy to understand. because the chaotic scene inside was enough to make anyone shudder at what had just happened. Tables and chairs were knocked over, glass was shattered, and food and shell casings littered the tiled floor. Two men lay motionless inside a wooden partitioned booth where they had been having dinner together just minutes earlier. Medical personnel and an ambulance were dispatched to the scene shortly afterward. Police initially confirmed that both victims had died from gunshot wounds. Their bodies slumped on the bench, blood soaking through their clothing and pooling on the floor beneath them. Forensic personnel at the scene counted multiple gunshot wounds on the victims, indicating the shooters fired again and again even after the men had fallen. This led investigators to suspect a ruthless, targeted purge. Investigators then quickly collected the shell casings scattered around the area. There were indications that multiple weapons had been used, most likely handguns, based on the casing size matching common semi-automatic pistols. From the number of casings, police estimated that at least 2 firearms were used in the attack. Bullets were embedded all over the wooden partition and the wall, an appalling sight in the middle of a restaurant. On the victim's unfinished table, bowls of fur and plates of food were strewn about, showing they were ambushed without warning, with no time to react or fight back. No weapons or suspicious items belonging to the victims were found nearby. That ruled out the possibility of a shootout or mutual self-defense. Overall, investigators concluded that the scene showed clear signs of a deliberate, targeted hit. The attackers stormed in, went straight to the victim's table, opened fire, and left immediately, taking no property. There were no signs of a struggle or robbery. The restaurant's cash register was untouched, and the victims' wallets and phones had not been tampered with. According to statements from several employees, there were 2 to 3 attackers wearing medical masks and black baseball caps. They appeared to be Asian with average builds. They rushed into the restaurant, walked straight to the victim's table, and drew their weapons to execute them without saying a word. The entire incident happened in a flash, lasting less than a minute. Right after the gunfire, the group ran out the door, jumped into a white car that had been waiting outside, and fled. It was a white Toyota Camry, though no one managed to see the license plate clearly amid the chaos. Even these few initial details were enough for police to believe this was not a spontaneous dispute, but a premeditated attack. The fact that the perpetrators covered their faces, had a getaway car ready, precisely targeted the 2 victims, and left immediately pointed to a certain level of brazenness and professionalism. That made the victims' identities and any connection they might have had to the attackers the crucial piece that needed to be decoded quickly. Only by learning who the victims were and whether they had any enemies could police hope to determine a motive and narrow down suspects. Both bodies were transferred to the Harris County Medical Examiner's office that night. Because all the patrons had fled the scene, no one was present to immediately identify the 2 unfortunate men. Restaurant staff said the 2 men were simply customers who had come for dinner, and they did not know their names. At the scene, police collected several personal belongings from the victims, including wallets and mobile phones. In the older victim's wallet, there was identification, a driver's license in the name of Han Min Win, born in 1959. The other victim was not carrying any identification. Police found only a small amount of cash and a set of keys in his pants pocket. Based on his appearance, the medical examiner estimated the second victim was around 40 years old or younger. As a result, confirming his identity required deeper investigative steps. The fastest approach was to check fingerprint records. Police took his fingerprints and compared them against identity databases and any criminal record files, if applicable. The comparison returned a match with the driver's license record of a man named Long Nguyen, born in 1971. That personal information was immediately cross-checked against Long Nguyen's credit history and phone data, which helped police locate contact information for his relatives. At dawn on October 6th, a phone call was made to Long Nguyen's family. They confirmed that Long had gone out to dinner with a friend the night before and had not returned home. The family was devastated and rushed to the investigating agency to assist with the identification process. By midday on October 6, 2022, police officially released the identities of the 2 victims. The first was Hang Minh Nguyen, born in 1959, a Vietnamese man who had long been settled in Houston. Hang came to the United States in the late 1970s. After decades of hard work, he had retired and was living peacefully with his wife and children. To family and friends, Han was a calm, modest man who lived simply and stayed close to the community. In his later years, his joy was meeting fellow Vietnamese friends for tea or a bowl of pho in the evening. One of those friends was the second victim, Long Nguyen, born in 1971, also a Vietnamese immigrant who came to the United States in the 1990s. Past the age of 50, Long was still working in HVAC and refrigeration repair, earning a steady living to support his small family. Long's family described him as a devoted husband and father. He had a cheerful personality and enjoyed socializing, which made it easy for him to befriend older people like Hunt. The two met through their church community and often made plans to have dinner together every week. For Long, Thai Loi restaurant was known for a favorite dish pho ba, and on the evening of October 5th, he and his friend went there to eat, just as they had many times before. No one could have imagined it would be their last meal. From extracted records and statements from friends and relatives, police were able to rule out the possibility of a personal conflict between the two victims. There were also no signs that either man had feuds or debts tied to organized crime, which made the case even more baffling and heartbreaking. Although the motive could not be explained right away, after ruling out a direct connection between the victims and the attackers, police increasingly leaned toward the theory that this may have been a random attack for some other purpose. It was possible the killers did not know the victims at all, and that choosing them was simply a means to carry out a hidden agenda, such as sending a threatening message to someone else. The missing piece now was, who were the perpetrators, and what was their true motive? To answer that, investigators shifted their focus to tracking down the attacker's trail. Investigators began by collecting technical evidence and following the suspect trail based on witness statements from the scene. The first leads came from nearby security cameras. Police reviewed surveillance cameras installed around the shopping area and along surrounding roads, searching for images of the suspect vehicle described by witnesses. Sure enough, not far from the restaurant, a traffic camera captured a white Toyota Camry speeding out of a neighborhood parking lot shortly after the gunshots. The footage was slightly blurry, but clear enough to read the license plate, LCS 3779, registered in Texas. A quick check of the vehicle registration system revealed that this Camry had been reported stolen not long before. That fit the scenario of the attackers using a stolen car to carry out the crime in order to avoid having their identities traced. With the plate number and vehicle details confirmed, police issued an urgent alert to all patrol units across the city to locate the white Camry, LCS 3779. At the same time, investigators looked into the registered owner of the vehicle, a woman living in Houston who had reported to police that her car had been stolen a few days earlier, but she had no additional leads. Even so, the vehicle remained a crucial clue. If it could be found, it might contain traces of the perpetrators, such as fingerprints, DNA, or evidence left inside. While the search for the Camry continued, detectives also wanted to pull surveillance footage from Thai Loi restaurant itself. Unfortunately, the restaurant was not equipped with interior cameras. However, CCTV from a nail salon next door aimed toward the restaurant's front entrance accidentally captured a faint, blurry clip of the attackers leaving the scene. In the black and white footage, the silhouettes of three men can be seen running to the white Camry and speeding off into the night. Although their faces are not visible, the detail confirms that there were indeed three participants. Two ran out from inside the restaurant, while one had been waiting behind the wheel. Another important piece of the puzzle then emerged from an unexpected direction. Just minutes before the shooting, another unusual incident had been reported. According to records, about 15 minutes before the tragedy at Thai Loi, there was a call about a disturbance at a coffee shop more than 3 kilometers away called Cafe Window, also in the Bel Air area. According to the report, an Asian man with a gun showed up at Cafe Window and threatened the owner, demanding protection money of 1,000 USD or there would be consequences. The owner and several people present cleverly stalled for time, even handing him 20 USD to calm him down, while discreetly signaling the shop's armed security guard. When the armed guard came over to intervene, the threatening man immediately left with his accomplices after warning that he would be back. The owner of Cafe Window reported the incident to police shortly afterward, at about 10:50 p.m. Although officers did not arrive before the troublemakers had left, they documented a description of the suspect, an Asian man close to 50 years old, around 1.65 to 1.70 meters tall, with a name that sounded like it was pronounced Swan. This really went to a read of a plighter. When investigators compared the two incidents, they were startled to notice multiple similarities. Both involved armed Asian men, happened close together in time, and occurred in the same general area. Most notably, the owner of Cafe Window clearly remembered that the leader of the group was the same person who had attacked him at this cafe in August 2022. That August incident left the owner with minor injuries, after which he hired armed security for protection. This time, the man called Xuan returned to demand protection money and left as soon as he saw security appear. The timing and the pattern of behavior led police to believe it was highly likely the group causing trouble at Cafe Window was the same group involved at Tai Loi. It was possible that after failing to extort money from Cafe Window, they looked for another target, taking their frustration out elsewhere, and Tai Loi restaurant was chosen by chance. Following that lead, police focused their investigation on the man known as Xuan. The owner of Cafe Window also provided additional information. The man spoke Vietnamese, looked rough and intimidating, and had lettered tattoos on his neck. This valuable information was immediately forwarded to the Houston Police Department's Criminal Profile Analysis Unit. Based on the physical description, police narrowed down several individuals in Houston's Vietnamese criminal records. One name stood out, Dang Xuân Bit, who had multiple prior offenses involving drugs and violence. Comparing images in the database with witness descriptions, detectives noticed that this man had a large Chinese character tattoo on the left side of his face. Moreover, the middle name Xuân in his full name matched the nickname Swan mentioned by witnesses. Believing they had found the right person, investigators pulled and dug deeper into his file. Dang Xuân Bit, 49 years old, was born in Vietnam but grew up in Houston after his family immigrated in the 1980s to 1990s. His life was a long chain of criminal missteps. Court records show that Bit began offending at a very young age, with his first conviction dating back to 1990. At the time, he was repeatedly arrested for illegal weapons possession, aggravated assault, and armed robbery. He built a reputation in the local underworld as someone reckless and violent. In 2010, Xuân Bit was accused of leading an illegal grow operation at a house in Katy, a suburb of Houston. When the FBI raided the site, agents seized as many as 289 items of evidence along with weapons. Bit pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 140 months in federal prison. He served his time until July 2020, when he was released after returning to society. Dang Xuân Bit not only failed to turn his life around, but sank even deeper into crime. With his thug-like temperament and a long-standing gang mentality, Bit began gathering several other Vietnamese American toughs, forming a group that specialized in debt collection and protection rackets in the Little Saigon area. He realized that many Vietnamese restaurants and coffee shops were often afraid of gangs, making it possible to use violence to force them to pay protection money. The shooting of the Cafe Window owner in August and the renewed demand for money on the night of October 5th were evidence of that operation. With Dang Xuân Bit identified as the #1 suspect, police continued working to identify possible accomplices who might have been with him. Based on Bit's known associations, another name surfaced, Nguyen Cham Hieu, 49 years old, who also had a robbery record and was on probation for a prior armed robbery. He too grew up in Houston's Vietnamese community, but came from a difficult background and had limited education. Unlike the hardened Xuân Bit, Hieu was known as a heavy drinker and addicted to painkillers. This man was also identifiable by numerous tattoos. Both of his arms were fully tattooed, and he had a distinctive dark blue star tattoo on his right cheekbone, making him hard to mistake for anyone else. That information was immediately compared with the video footage that had been collected. Investigators zoomed in on the blurry images from cameras around the scene and noticed that one suspect had a dark mark on the cheek area, possibly a facial tattoo. Combined with social media data, police located Nguyen Cham Hieu's public Facebook account. The photos on Hieu's Facebook matched perfectly with the man seen alongside Xuân Bit on camera. With that, the identities of 2 of the 3 suspects were confirmed as Dang Xuân Bit and Nguyen Cham Hieu. Both had criminal histories, were extremely dangerous, and were believed to be armed. With specific targets identified, Houston police immediately moved to carry out an arrest plan. A judge approved warrants for both suspects. However, taking them into custody would not be simple, because there was a strong chance they would resist violently. A fugitive task force coordinated with the Houston Police Department's SWAT unit to surveil locations where Bit and Hieu might be hiding. The stolen white Toyota Camry was also a key focus. On October 10, 2022, a welcome break in the case emerged. Police found the stolen Camry, LCS 3779, abandoned near an apartment complex in southwest Houston. While detectives conducted a covert stakeout, they spotted a man lingering near the vehicle. After a closer look, they identified him as Nguyen Cham Hieu. Officers immediately moved in and took him down. Caught off guard, Hugh had no chance to fight back and was quickly arrested. During a search of the suspect, police recovered a handgun, a Glock, and several rounds of ammunition consistent with the shell casings collected at the scene. However, later forensic testing showed that this Glock was not the weapon used in the Tai Loi case. It was likely that Hugh had been carrying a different firearm. Even so, arresting Nguyen Chong Hugh was a major breakthrough. At first, Hugh was detained for violating the terms of his probation, which gave police time to strengthen the evidence needed to charge him in the killing. At that point, the most dangerous suspect, Dang Xuan Bit, was still nowhere to be seen. However, from Hugh's initial statements, police became certain that Bit was the primary shooter. Using investigative methods, police also determined where Xuan Bit might be hiding, an apartment leased under his girlfriend's name in southeast Houston. On October 16, 2022, a SWAT team surrounded the apartment complex to execute the arrest warrant for Dang Xuan Bit. Knowing he could not escape, the suspect barricaded himself inside and refused to open the door for nearly 3 hours. Police had to use a loudspeaker to call for his surrender, while also preparing to breach if necessary. In the end, after a tense standoff, the suspect finally came out. He was escorted to headquarters with a defiant attitude, refusing to say a single word about the remaining accomplice. With both Dang Xuan Bit and Nguyen Chong Hugh successfully in custody, Houston police officially announced the case had been solved. On November 14, 2022, the Houston Police Department released a press statement confirming that the two suspects had been arrested and charged with multiple counts related to the killings. However, the third person involved, described as an Asian male, remained at large and was wanted. Police urged the public to provide information about the third suspect through the Crime Stoppers hotline. Through Hugh, investigators learned that this man had only been hired as a driver with the promise of a cut of the money. He may not have directly carried out the shooting, but he was still an accomplice, so law enforcement continued efforts to bring him in. Based on the suspect's statements and the clues gathered, police were able to successfully reconstruct the entire sequence of events. On the afternoon of October 5, 2022, Dang Xuan Bit gathered the group inside a rundown rented room in southwest Houston. Their plan for that day was to collect protection money. Their first target was Cafe Window, the coffee shop where Bit had previously taught the owner a lesson in August. That time, he shot and seriously injured the owner for refusing to pay. At around 10 POW, Bit, he, and a third accomplice got into a white Toyota Camry that they had stolen a few days earlier. The Camry rolled under the dim yellow streetlights, heading toward Wilcrest Drive, where Cafe Window was located. At 10:45 p.m., Cafe Window was preparing to close, and inside were only the owner and a few last customers. Suddenly, the glass door was shoved open, and Dang Xuan Bit barged in, followed by Nguyen Chong Hugh. Neither of them bothered to cover their faces, acting as if they were not afraid of being recognized at all. Bit pulled out a weapon and demanded that the owner hand over 1,000 USD. Trembling, the owner opened the drawer. There was only a 20 USD bill, so he offered it first in an attempt to keep the peace. At that tense moment, from behind the counter, an armed security guard slowly stepped out. The Glock being chambered made a sharp click, a clear warning. Dang Xuan Bit glanced over and immediately understood the situation had turned against him. He cursed, backed toward the door, then suddenly spun around and ran to the car with Hugh. The white Camry roared to life and sped off. Inside the car, Bit was seething with rage, as if he had been humiliated. The idea of going to get more firepower and coming back to settle the score began to take shape, but he knew the cafe had plenty of cameras, the guard was trained, and the owner might have already called the police. Going back now would only make things worse. But Bit's bloodlust still demanded an outlet. He looked out through the windshield and suddenly spotted the neon lights of a Vietnamese restaurant ahead that was still open late. It was Tai Loi, a place he had driven past many times. The Camry turned into the parking lot in front of Tai Loi. It was close to 11 p.m., and the restaurant was still fairly crowded since many Vietnamese people have a habit of eating late. At 11:05 p.m., the door of Tai Loi burst open. Two men rushed inside. Without a word of warning, Bit raised his gun toward the corner of the restaurant where Han Min Win and Long Win were sitting. A barrage of shots erupted with deafening cracks, throwing off bright flashes. Han and Long collapsed onto the table before they even understood what was happening. People inside screamed in terror. Other customers scrambled and ran out through the back in the hazy smoke of gunfire. Only then did Bit lower his weapon and coldly step closer to finish the job. He aimed at Hein, who was still barely breathing, and pulled the trigger twice more. Then he turned to Long and fired one more shot into the head of the victim lying slumped over. That brutal act unfolded before the stunned eyes of a few employees who had frozen in place, unable to run in time. Once it was done, Bit and his accomplices immediately sprinted outside and jumped into the white Camry that had been waiting. The tires screeched, burning rubber across the pavement as he floored the gas and shot out of the parking lot. The Camry vanished into the night. To avoid being traced, Bit drove through multiple neighborhoods in a winding route, then stopped in a dark parking area a few kilometers from the scene. The three split up, each heading in a different direction. Bit and Hugh changed jackets, threw away their masks, walked a few blocks, then called a taxi back to the apartment. By then, Hugh was starting to sober up and panic set in. Bit reassured him, planning to lie low for a few weeks, and then return to business as usual, pretending nothing was connected to them. They did not realize that police had already picked up too many leads within just a few days from CCTV footage and from Bit's criminal history. By October 10th, when Hugh was lingering near the spot where they had stashed the Camry, trying to figure out how to destroy more evidence, police moved in and arrested him. At that moment, their criminal drama officially came to an end under the force of the law. One by one, the perpetrators were taken into custody, bringing an end to the days of fear they had spread across Little Saigon. After the arrests, and once enough evidence had been collected, the Harris County District Attorney's Office quickly charged Dang Xuan Bit and Nguyen Chom Hyo with first-degree murder with aggravating factors. The judge denied bail for both suspects, citing the danger they posed and their risk of fleeing. The prosecution, led by Chief of the Major Offenders Division Chris Condon and his colleague George Lindsay, made it clear they were determined to bring both defendants to justice. Faced with an overwhelming body of evidence that could not be denied, the defense was in a very weak position. In fact, Chom Hyo initially denied involvement. But when he realized his friend would likely pin everything on him, he signaled that he wanted to negotiate a guilty plea in exchange for leniency. As for Dang Xuan Bit, he remained defiant for longer, initially pleading not guilty and insisting on going to trial. The preliminary trial was scheduled for August 2024, nearly 2 years after the crime. But an unexpected development occurred right before the proceedings. Xuan Bit changed course and agreed to plead guilty. In mid-August 2024, just days before jury selection, Bit, through his attorney, requested to plead guilty to killing in exchange for not being prosecuted for the death penalty. Prosecutors accepted the deal. As a result, on August 15, 2024, Dang Xuan Bit appeared in court, pleaded guilty, and received a sentence of 45 years in prison. While it was not life without parole, it was severe enough that he would spend nearly all of his remaining life behind bars. Just 3 weeks later, Nguyen Chom Hyo also pleaded guilty. On August 29, 2024, Hyo received the same sentence, 45 years in prison. With both men pleading guilty, a full jury trial was no longer necessary. Their guilty pleas also meant they gave up the right to appeal later, ensuring the finality of the sentences. However, the case file remains open until the third suspect is captured. Houston authorities have continued to offer a reward through Crime Stoppers to encourage the public to provide leads. And if the remaining suspect is arrested, it will be difficult for him to escape accountability because the statements from the two convicted men, Hyo and Bit, carry enough weight to stand against him. Overall, even without a dramatic courtroom battle, the legal outcome still carries a strong deterrent effect. Those who disregard the lives of others ultimately face harsh punishment. Justice may have come late, but it brought at least some measure of relief to the victims' families and the community. Late on the night of May 5, 1986, the 911 dispatch center in Santa Ana received a frantic emergency call. On the other end of the line, a trembling man reported that his wife had just been killed inside their home. Police officers and paramedics were immediately dispatched to the small house on Huron Drive. When the first responders stepped inside, an unforgettable scene unfolded before them. A middle-aged woman lay slumped beside the bed, her hands folded as if in prayer. Around her, a broken rosary lay scattered in pieces. Outside in the living room, more than a dozen children of all ages were sobbing uncontrollably in their father's arms. Everyone was in shock, clinging tightly to one another as if they had just awakened from a horrifying nightmare. Based on initial observations, investigators believed there were clear signs of a violent break-in. The home was in disarray. A closet stood wide open, drawers had been yanked out, and belongings were strewn everywhere, suggesting the house had just been ransacked in an extremely aggressive search. What was strange, however, was that the family reported nothing valuable had been taken. The wallet was still intact, and the few pieces of jewelry they owned were untouched. Investigators also found that a landline phone in the kitchen had been ripped from its cord, an indication that the intruders deliberately tried to prevent the victim from calling for help. In the bedroom, the single bullet that passed through the victim's body was still lying on the floor, suggesting the weapon used may have been a small caliber handgun. The victim's identity was quickly confirmed through the husband's statement. She was Huyen Thị Hoang, 46 years old, a Vietnamese woman and the mother of 14 children. Trung Nguyen, 59 years old, the victim's husband, was still in shock. He and the children said that sometime after 10 p.m., 5 masked strangers suddenly burst into their home. Through sobs, Kim Hung Go, 19 years old, the oldest daughter, recounted the horrifying moments that led to that night's tragedy. That evening, she came home late from school. As soon as she drove into the driveway, a gunman suddenly pressed a weapon to her head and ordered her out of the car. Immediately, 4 other shadowy figures rushed in. One grabbed her arm, while another shoved a gun into her back, forcing her toward the front door. At that moment, Kim's 8-year-old brother saw his sister had arrived and innocently went to open the door to welcome her. The instant the door swung open, all 5 robbers charged inside like wild wolves. According to the family, the group moved with speed and coordination. 2 of them closed in on Kim, shoved her down onto the sofa, and shouted for everyone to gather in one place. At the same time, another one sprinted into the kitchen and violently tore the wall phone from its cord, cutting off any chance of calling for help. The remaining intruders split up and ran to the bedrooms, dragging each family member into the living room. They rummaged everywhere, throwing open closets, searching under beds, and even storming into the bathroom where 2 boys were hiding and yanking them out. In total, the father and 14 children, ranging in age from 4 to 21, were held at gunpoint. They were forced to huddle together on the couch, and no one dared to move. The robbers then screamed repeatedly, demanding money. In utter panic, the father and children could only shake their heads and plead because the family was struggling financially at that moment. They had less than $100 in cash in the house. Beyond witness accounts, a nearby neighbor also provided an important lead. He told police that he had seen a dark green Datsun driving slowly around the neighborhood multiple times in the days before the crime. At one point, the unfamiliar young men even stopped the car to closely observe the row of houses before speeding away. From this, authorities formed an early assessment that the gang had likely conducted surveillance in advance. They may have chosen the family as a target because, from the outside, there were many cars parked in front of the house, leading the criminals to mistakenly believe this was a wealthy household. The unfortunate victim in this case was Huyen Thị Hoang, 46 years old, a gentle, kind Vietnamese woman who was respected by everyone around her. She married Trung Nguyen in the early 1950s in a rural village in southern Vietnam. Over 30 years of marriage, the couple raised 14 children together, 8 sons and 6 daughters. After 1975, Huyen's family immigrated to San Diego, California, and around 1978, they moved to Santa Ana in Orange County after Trung found work in Little Saigon. Life in a new country was extremely difficult at first, but people always remembered Mrs. Hoang as resilient and hardworking. She stayed home as a homemaker, devoting herself completely to building a stable home and making sure all 14 children could receive a proper education. However, hardships struck when Trung lost his job in 1985 due to company layoffs. At 59, he faced major obstacles, finding new work, and the family's finances grew tighter by the day. Even so, Huyen remained optimistic. She prayed even more diligently and often encouraged her husband and children to keep faith in the future. That is why her sudden death left an immeasurable void. 14 children lost their beloved mother forever, and Trung lost the life partner he deeply cherished. In the early days of the investigation, Santa Ana police were nearly at a dead end. The investigative team even suspected that the robbery crew may have fled to another state immediately after the killing, following the nomadic pattern they had seen before in some Vietnamese criminal groups they tracked. To expand the search, police worked with federal authorities to review records of groups that had committed similar crimes. Those records showed that from Houston, Texas to San Jose, California, there had been multiple robberies targeting Vietnamese families, often using the same method: masked intruders, guns used to control victims, and aggressive searches for valuables. Unlike traditional gangs with fixed territory, these groups moved freely, relying on networks of friends and acquaintances across different places. Just when the trail seemed faintest, an unexpected phone call completely changed the course of the case. On May 28, 1986, nearly 3 weeks after the tragedy, a Vietnamese woman called the Santa Ana Police Department. She identified herself as the mother of a 13-year-old boy named Mun Huyen and said her son had just confessed that he was involved in the robbery that left one person dead. The call stunned investigators and became the pivotal breakthrough that tore away the mystery. Following the information she provided, police quickly raided a house in Garden Grove near Santa Ana and arrested 2 juveniles who were there: Mun Huyen, 13 years old, the boy who had confessed to his mother, and another boy named Quoc-Bao, 12 years old. In the interrogation room, both Quoc and Mun quickly bowed their heads and confessed. The 2 teenagers admitted that on the night of May 5th, they and several older boys took part in the robbery in Santa Ana. They described in clear detail how the night unfolded, and their accounts matched the victim family's statements exactly. From their confessions, police were shocked to learn that the entire crew consisted of Vietnamese juveniles, with the youngest only 12 and the oldest only just past adolescence. Even so, both Quoc and Mun insisted they did not carry a gun or directly harm anyone. They said they merely followed the older boys and acted as errand runners. According to the 2 boys, the person who fired the fatal shot that killed Mrs. Hoang was An Sao, who was only 14 and was considered the most reckless member of the group. Quoc and Mun also repeated Sao's excuse afterward that he accidentally pulled the trigger because Mrs. Hoang screamed in terror when she saw him in the bedroom. They added that immediately after the gunshot, it was Sao himself who shouted for everyone to run, and the group panicked and fled at once, not even managing to take any property with them. With these critical details, investigators were able to identify the full roster of the crew. In addition to Quoc, Mun, and Sao Van Lê, who were staying in Garden Grove, the group also included Dung Nguyen, 17 years old, and Tien Van Nguyen, 19 years old, both of whom also lived in the Garden Grove area. Dung and Tien were the 2 oldest members and were identified as the ones leading the group. According to Quoc and Mun, Tien and Dung recruited them by tempting them with promises of a big payout. On June 6, 1986, investigators went undercover and set up surveillance at a Vietnamese shopping center in Santa Ana where Dung Nguyen was known to frequent. As planned, the moment Dung appeared, officers moved in quickly and arrested him before he could resist. Building on that success, on June 12, 1986, police carried out another raid on a house in Garden Grove and successfully apprehended Tien Van Nguyen as he stepped outside. However, the case still could not be closed because the shooter, Sao Van Lê, had vanished without a trace. On June 18, 1986, local newspapers and TV stations widely broadcast a notice that Sao Van Lê was wanted for murder and armed robbery. But after that, Sao seemed to disappear off the face of the earth. To this day, more than 3 decades later, Orange County authorities still keep his case open, with an arrest warrant that has no expiration, hoping that one day the killer will resurface and finally face justice. After the investigation, the profile of the perpetrators gradually came into focus. They were 5 Vietnamese youths, all extremely young. Among them, Sao Van Lê, 14 years old, was identified as the suspect who fired the shot that killed the victim. According to friends, Sao was stubborn and reckless, and he frequently associated with older delinquent youths. At an age when he should have still been in school, Sao committed a horrific crime, and has remained on the run ever since. Next was Tien Van Nguyen, around 19 to 20 years old, believed to be the oldest member and likely the ringleader of the group. Tien lived in Garden Grove, but his background was complicated. On his birth records, his year of birth was listed as 1972, meaning he would have been only 14 at the time of the crime. Yet substantial evidence suggested he was actually around 20. This discrepancy was believed to be deliberate. Tien allegedly falsified his age to qualify as a juvenile if he committed crimes, a calculated tactic that revealed his cunning and deceitful nature. Court records showed that Tien left Vietnam in 1980 with his older sister, while his mother remained back home. Growing up without parents nearby, and with his sister overwhelmed by survival and unable to supervise him closely, Tien dropped out of school early and began mixing with bad influences. Before long, Tien became part of a local street gang crowd. Many details of the crime, from stealing a car for preparation to assigning roles for guarding and planning an escape, were believed to have been orchestrated by someone as seasoned as Tien. Even on the night of the robbery, as the group discussed how to control Kim Huong outside, Tien reportedly coldly declared that if there was any commotion inside, they would harm her immediately. The next suspect was Dung Nguyen, 17 years old, also living in Garden Grove, with a deeply unfortunate background. Dung was described as homeless and living a transient life. On the night of the crime, his role was to hold a gun, guard the hostages, or take part in ransacking the house. However, after being arrested, Dung showed remorse and chose to cooperate with prosecutors. He agreed to plead guilty early in exchange for leniency, and he also agreed to testify in court against his older accomplices. Mun Huan, 13 years old, living in Anaheim, was the boy who ultimately confessed through his mother. At that age, Mun seemed not to fully grasp the severe consequences of what he had done. He said he did not realize that participating in a robbery could lead to murder. After the crime, overwhelmed by guilt, Mun told his mother everything. Quoc-Bao, 12 years old, also living in Anaheim, was the youngest member of the group. Like Mun, Quoc still had a family caring for him. The only motive that may have pulled him into the crime was a desire to prove himself to friends, a mindset that is sadly common among adolescents. During questioning, Quoc insisted that he never held a gun and was only tagging along with friends. However, the victim's family maintained that every intruder that night had a weapon in hand. It is very possible that Quoc was given a fake gun by the older boys for the purpose of intimidating the victims. Overall, none of the 5 suspects had any serious prior criminal record. This could be considered their first major crime, but terrifyingly, it became an exceptionally brutal murder. Based on the suspects' statements, police were able to reconstruct the sequence of events in considerable detail. The plan was believed to have been masterminded by Tien Van Nguyen and Dung Nguyen. The two recruited 3 younger boys to make them easier to control and to increase the size of the crew. To prepare, a few days before the crime, the group stole 2 cars to use as transportation in order to avoid being traced by law enforcement. They also readied weapons, including at least 3 handguns. On the night of May 5th, 1986, all 5 met up, split into 2 vehicles, and drove to Santa Ana to carry out the job. At around 10 p.m., just as they arrived in the area, Kim Huong-ho returned from school and pulled into the driveway. Seeing an opportunity, Sao was assigned to approach her and use her so the group could rush straight into the house. Once inside, they quickly took control of the entire family and forced 13 people to huddle together in the living room. While some stood guard over the hostages, the others began ransacking the house and cutting the phone line. Throughout it all, the robbers shouted and threatened to harm each person if the family did not hand over cash and gold, plunging everyone into terror. Amid the chaos, Lê Văn Sao broke into a back bedroom where Huyen Thi Huang was praying, unaware of what was happening. When she suddenly saw a masked man holding a gun, she panicked and screamed. The moment startled Sao, and in that confusion, he likely pulled the trigger, shooting the victim and killing her on the spot. The gunshot seemed to freeze the entire house in shock. Trung tried to rush toward the bedroom but was stopped at gunpoint by the robbers. Realizing the situation had spiraled out of control, Tien immediately ordered everyone to retreat. The group scattered and fled into the night, leaving behind a family shattered beyond repair. The case was soon brought to court and split into two parallel tracks: juvenile court for defendants under 18 and superior court for adult defendants. In July 1986, at the Orange County Juvenile Court, the two youngest defendants, Quoc-Bao, 12 years old, and Mun Huan, 13 years old, were tried on charges of first-degree murder, along with related charges such as armed robbery and burglary. Because both had confessed, the proceedings moved relatively quickly. After finding them guilty, the judge did not immediately impose sentencing, but instead ordered a probation report phase in order to carefully evaluate their family circumstances, backgrounds, and potential for rehabilitation. On August 8, 1986, the court officially ruled that Quoc-Bao and Mun Huan would be committed to the California Youth Authority for rehabilitation until they turned 25. The decision immediately sparked heated debate within the community. Some argued the sentence was far too lenient for a murder charge, while others saw it as a chance for two still malleable children to be educated, rehabilitated, and removed from a harmful environment. As for Dung Nguyen, 17 years old, his case took a different path because he chose to plead guilty early and cooperated actively with investigators. In September 1986, the Orange County District Attorney's Office reached a plea agreement. Under that agreement, Dung admitted to first-degree murder and armed robbery in exchange for the prosecution recommending that he serve his sentence in the California Youth Authority rather than state prison, and that no sentencing enhancements would be pursued. After the judge approved the deal, Dung was also placed in the juvenile correctional system, with the possibility of detention and transfers based on age until he turned 25. While waiting for Tien's trial, Dung showed clear remorse and, through his attorney, repeatedly conveyed apologies to the victim's family. At that point, the legal spotlight largely shifted to Tien Van Nguyen, who faced an adult trial and the possibility of a life sentence. In March 1987, at the Orange County Superior Court, Tien was formally tried before a jury. Based on recorded confessions, witness testimony, and statements from co-defendants, the jury reached a verdict that Tien Van Nguyen was guilty of first-degree murder, along with armed robbery and burglary. At the sentencing hearing, the defense attorneys continued trying to rely on the question of Tien's true age in order to seek a reduced punishment. They cited information on his green card, as well as the inability to verify birth records due to international relations barriers at the time. However, the judge rejected these arguments and stated there was sufficient basis to conclude that Tien was an adult. The court sentenced him to life in prison, with a minimum of 25 years to be served before he could be considered for parole. Tien's attorneys then filed an appeal, focusing on the validity of the age determination procedure and whether the defendant's confession had been voluntary. In August 1990, the California Court of Appeal denied the appeal and upheld the original sentence. As for Sao Van Lay, the shooter, because he had fled, authorities were still unable to bring him to trial. Prosecutors obtained a special warrant and placed the case on hold under the principle that if Sao were ever captured, he would still be prosecuted and would face a life sentence. The 1986 robbery murder committed by this Vietnamese gang sent powerful shockwaves through the public. Media coverage at the time was constant, expressing disbelief at the reality that the perpetrators were Vietnamese children still so young. From another angle, Mun Huan's mother was widely praised by both the press and the community for her courage in voluntarily turning her own child in to the authorities. Even while enduring unimaginable pain, she chose justice and what was right over personal emotion, and it was precisely that courage that helped bring the case to light so quickly. Her action also played an important role in building trust between the Vietnamese community and U.S. law enforcement, an already cautious relationship in the years before. After the case, Orange County Police increased outreach to the Vietnamese community by establishing Vietnamese language hotlines and organizing in-person meetings and discussions. These efforts aim to help residents understand that cooperating with police is the best way to protect themselves and their families. As we close today's case, the biggest mystery likely remains Sao Van Lay's current whereabouts. Is he still quietly hiding under a false identity somewhere in the United States? Or did he flee long ago to another place to bury his criminal past? At approximately 3:30 in the afternoon on September 29, 2020, the 911 Emergency Dispatch Center in Edmonds, Washington received a distress call from a 23-year-old man who identified himself as Thien Vuong. Over the phone, his voice clearly revealed urgency, yet he tried to remain calm while reporting the situation. Thien said that his girlfriend, Thanh V. Lee, and a close friend had received threats the previous day. At that very moment, the suspect was present at her workplace at Buhan Market. Fearing that something terrible was about to happen, Thien proactively contacted the police in hopes of receiving timely assistance. However, while the conversation between Thien and the dispatcher was still ongoing, chaotic noises suddenly erupted from the other end of the line. Before Thien could finish his sentence, it was cut off by a series of loud, piercing sounds, followed immediately by panicked screams and sheer terror. Just a few brief seconds later, the space was swallowed by a heavy silence. Realizing that the situation had escalated to an extremely serious level, the dispatcher immediately deployed law enforcement officers to the scene. In that very moment, despite enduring painful injuries, Thien still tried to hold tightly onto his phone to report that all three of them, including their friend Thai Trun, who was with them, had been suddenly attacked. Only minutes later, the wail of sirens pierced through Highway 99. The scene outside Buhan Market was utterly chaotic. Vehicles were left scattered in disarray, and many bystanders were still in shock, clutching one another or seeking shelter behind market stalls. As officers approached the victims, they immediately recognized the severity of the attack. Right at the market entrance, two victims, one male and one female, had collapsed, their clothing stained with dark red patches. Not far away, another young woman, suffering from severe injuries to her face and legs, was desperately trying to crawl toward her two friends in overwhelming panic. Heart-wrenching cries and desperate calls of each other's names tore through the otherwise peaceful afternoon air. A witness, still trembling, told the police that the perpetrator was a small-built Asian man dressed entirely in black, wearing a matching black baseball cap. He had approached the group as they stood together and suddenly pulled out a gun, firing multiple shots without hesitation. After seeing all three collapse, the man calmly turned his back, walked away, and disappeared from the scene. Upon receiving the information, the Edmonds Police Department immediately issued a system-wide alert and coordinated with neighboring units to intensify the search for the suspect. Meanwhile, rescuing the victims was the top priority. The two women were rushed directly to Harborview Medical Center in Seattle, home to one of the region's leading trauma centers, while the male victim was transported to Providence Hospital in nearby Everett for treatment. Notably, just before the ambulance departed, a shocking piece of information emerged. In her final moments, Thanh V. Lee managed to whisper a haunting statement to emergency responders, "My friend's husband did this." Shortly afterward, due to the severity of her injuries, the young woman did not survive. That final statement was immediately relayed to investigators. Through urgent verification, the identity of the prime suspect quickly came to light. He was Duy Phung Nguyen, the husband of victim Thi Trun, and also someone acquainted with Thanh V. Lee. According to information from her family, Thanh Vi Lee, the unfortunate young woman in this incident, was a 20-year-old of Vietnamese origin living in the nearby city of Mount Lake Terrace. She worked at Buhan Oriental Market on Highway 99, and it was there that she became close friends with Thai Trun. Friends described Thanh V as an incredibly warm-hearted and kind person. She did not hesitate to stand up for Thai Trun when she learned that her friend had been enduring ongoing mistreatment from her husband. At the time of the incident, Thanh V was living alone in a small apartment and had proactively invited Thai to move in with her to help her rebuild her life after leaving her husband's home. In addition, Thanh V was in a happy relationship with Thien Vuong, the 23-year-old man who was also present during the incident and fortunately survived. They had been a beautiful couple, always standing side by side through everything. Therefore, Thanh Vi's sudden passing left Thien's life engulfed in profound grief and haunting memories. The third victim in the case was Thai Trun, 24 years old, the wife of suspect Du Phung Nguyen, and also Thanh Vi's close friend. According to those close to her, Thai Trun married Duy Phung in 2017 in Vietnam. In July 2020, she followed her husband to settle in the city of Everett, Washington, to live with his family. For Thai, her first months on American soil quickly turned into dark days as her husband gradually revealed his hot temper and alarming controlling behavior. In a foreign land far from home, Thai found comfort only through her job at Buhan Market and her friend Than Vi Ly, whom she considered like a sister. Their friendship grew even stronger when Thai Trun decided to leave her husband's house to escape the cycle of abuse. She moved in with Than Vi and received wholehearted protection and emotional support from her friend. No one could have imagined that this very decision to seek peace would be used by Dui Phung as an excuse to unleash his fury on the two young women. On the afternoon of September 29, 2020, the Edmonds Police Department mobilized maximum resources to locate Du Phung Nguyen, issuing a warning that the suspect was armed and considered highly dangerous. Initial investigative efforts focused on Du Phung's family and personal relationships. When officers contacted his residence in Everett, they confirmed that he was not present there. However, at approximately 8:30 in the evening that same day, an unexpected development occurred. Du Phung Nguyen's mother called an Edmonds investigator to report that she was with her son just outside the Everett Police Department. Upon receiving the call, detectives felt a sense of relief knowing that Du Phung had decided to turn himself in. According to case records, it was his mother who persistently persuaded him to surrender after he had locked himself inside the house for hours. She later recounted that when he returned home, Dui Phung was extremely panicked and confessed to his parents that he had ruined everything, even expressing suicidal thoughts. He handed over the weapon, a Glock pistol, to his mother for safekeeping. Shortly afterward, she personally drove him straight to the Everett Police Department to ensure that he would not commit any reckless acts. In the parking lot of the police station, as soon as Du Phung Nguyen stepped out of the vehicle, he was immediately restrained by officers who had been waiting. A quick inspection led police to recover the firearm used in the attack from his mother's car. Additionally, during a search of the suspect's residence, authorities discovered another Beretta pistol inside his personal vehicle parked in the family garage. The investigation revealed that Du Phung had purchased the Glock just 2 weeks before the incident, while he had owned the Beretta since 2016. Both firearms were legally registered. Subsequent forensic examinations confirmed that the Glock matched the ballistic evidence collected at Buhan Market. With the suspect in custody, the investigation quickly moved into the evidence gathering and detailed interrogation phase to support prosecution efforts. Detectives from Snohomish County questioned Dui Phung Nguyen in the presence of his defense attorney. However, he appeared relatively calm and refused to provide any information related to the incident. When informed that he was suspected of involvement in acts that had taken other people's lives, Du Phung coldly responded with a question of his own: "Who died?" The remark left even seasoned investigators stunned by his apparent lack of remorse. In the absence of a direct confession, police relied on objective evidence to reconstruct the entire sequence of events. At this stage, footage from the security camera system at Buhan Market was considered the most crucial piece of evidence. Extracted surveillance footage captured nearly the entire sequence of events. That day, Du Phung Nguyen was seen repeatedly lingering inside the store where the Tren worked, causing her to hide fearfully behind a coworker. He later walked away. Just minutes afterward, Than Vi Ly and her boyfriend hurried to the location. The three friends embraced and then left the store together. At that moment, Dui Phung suddenly returned, quietly followed them toward the exit, and abruptly pulled out a gun, firing multiple shots. In total, he discharged 12 rounds at the three victims at close range, with movements that were deliberate and precise. This detail further reinforced the authorities' conclusion. This was not an impulsive act committed in a moment of anger, but the result of a plan that had been premeditated. In addition to the surveillance footage, police recovered threatening text messages that Du Phung had sent to his wife on the night of September 28, 2020, approximately 15 hours before the tragedy unfolded. Among them were two chilling lines: "Than Vi is done," and "Tomorrow everything will end." Upon receiving those messages, Thai immediately forwarded them to Than Vi Ly and Thien Vuong. She was extremely frightened, knowing that her husband owned firearms and had previously threatened to harm them both. For that reason, the following morning, Thien decided to drive both Thai and Than Vi to work to ensure their safety and remained at the store throughout the entire shift. Tragically, even those precautions were not enough to prevent the catastrophe. However, the string of messages clearly revealed the suspect's motive. He harbored resentment toward Than Vi Ly and was determined to deal with her, believing that she had interfered in his marriage. Furthermore, official records also revealed a history of violence in the marriage between Du Phung and Thi Tran. Investigators obtained data from an emergency call Thi had made on August 2nd, 2020. Over the phone, she was crying as she reported that her husband had physically assaulted her. However, the call was abruptly cut off when a woman believed to be Thi's mother-in-law snatched the phone and told the dispatcher that everything is fine, nothing happened, before hanging up. Although Everett police responded to the residence shortly afterward, they were unable to locate the caller. Thi later faced harsh criticism from her husband's family, who accused her of bringing shame to the family. Only a few weeks after that incident, she was forced out of the house by her mother-in-law. Perhaps it was this implicit tolerance that emboldened Duy Phuong, making him increasingly defiant and violent. However, once the tragedy truly unfolded, even his parents recognized the devastating consequences and persuaded their son to surrender, voluntarily handing over the weapon. With a comprehensive body of evidence, prosecutors in Snohomish County swiftly finalized the charges against Duy Phuong Nguyen. Less than a month after the incident, on October 27, 2020, he was formally charged with the following offenses: first-degree murder with a firearm enhancement in the death of Thanh Vi Ly, first-degree assault with a domestic violence enhancement against his wife Thi Truong, and first-degree assault against Thien Vuong. The Snohomish County Court held the first arraignment hearing in early November 2020. During this hearing, Duy Phuong Nguyen was assisted by a Vietnamese interpreter due to language barriers. Notably, despite the serious allegations presented by prosecutors, he maintained a defiant attitude and entered a plea of not guilty. Given the dangerous nature of the suspect, the judge ordered that he remain in custody with bail set at $3 million USD. This enormous amount effectively extinguished any hope of release pending trial. He was detained while awaiting formal court proceedings. According to investigative records, Duy Phuong Nguyen was born around 1993. He lived with his parents in the city of Everett, Washington. His family had long settled in the United States and maintained a relatively stable life in the local community. In 2017, during a trip back to his homeland, Duy Phuong married Thi Truong in Saigon. After completing the necessary sponsorship procedures, he brought his wife to the United States to reunite with his parents in the summer of 2020. What was expected to be a promising marriage in a foreign land quickly deteriorated. Within just a few weeks of living together, Duy Phuong's darker side began to surface. He frequently used violence against his wife, both at home and at her workplace. More troubling was the fact that, although they lived under the same roof, Duy Phuong's parents appeared to shield their son. They even interfered when Thi attempted to seek assistance from authorities. Investigators determined that Duy Phuong Nguyen's motive stemmed from a desire for control, jealousy, and blind resentment. He believed that Thanh Vi Ly had influenced his wife and caused her to leave him. Notably, there were no signs that he suffered from mental illness or acted under temporary provocation. On the contrary, his actions reflected calm calculation and deliberate planning. According to law enforcement records, after the Truong moved out, Duy Phuong secretly monitored her movements. He repeatedly lurked near bus stops where she appeared, frightening her to the point that she began documenting each encounter with her husband for her own protection. Not stopping there, he also purchased another firearm just 2 weeks before the tragedy occurred. By the afternoon of September 28, 2020, after making his preparations, Duy Phuong began sending threatening messages to his wife. Realizing the imminent danger, Thi immediately informed Thanh Vi and Thien Vuong. The three of them understood that Duy Phuong was in an unstable state, so they agreed to stay together the following day to ensure their safety. On the morning of September 29, 2020, Thien Vuong personally drove to pick up Thanh Vi Ly and Thi Truong so they could go to work together at Buhan Market in Edmonds. As a precaution, Thien decided to remain near the store throughout the day. His presence somewhat eased Thi's constant anxiety. That morning passed peacefully. At around 2 in the afternoon, when Thanh Vi finished her shift, the group temporarily breathed a sigh of relief as Duy Phuong had not appeared. Believing the situation had somewhat calmed down, Thanh Vi and Thien left to take care of nearby personal matters, while Thi continued working her afternoon shift. However, the real turmoil struck at approximately 3 in the afternoon. Duy Phuong suddenly showed up at Buhan Market and demanded to know where Thanh Vi Ly was. Although Thi Truong tried to remain calm and told him that her friend had already left, he persistently confronted her with a deeply unsettling attitude before temporarily walking out of the store. Thi immediately called Thanh Vi to inform her. Despite her worries, Thanh Vi decided to return to the market to confront the situation and attempt to resolve everything, hoping to ease the tension. At first, Thien strongly objected, but in the end, he drove his girlfriend back. unwilling to let her face potential danger alone. During that tense period, Du Phuong returned to the store for a second time. He purchased a bottle of alcohol with an outwardly calm, almost chilling demeanor before leaving again, a gesture that further alarmed those who witnessed it. At approximately 3:23 in the afternoon, Thon Vai and Thien arrived back at the workplace and met Thai just outside the market entrance. As the three stood near the exit area, only a few minutes later, Du Phuong appeared for the third time. Sensing that the situation was deteriorating, Thien advised everyone to move outside and immediately contact law enforcement. However, just as the emergency call was being placed, Du Phuong stepped out of the store and walked straight toward the three of them. Within a matter of seconds, he pulled the trigger repeatedly, causing all three victims to collapse on the spot. Afterward, Du Phuong coldly left the scene, leaving behind chaos and devastation. After committing the crime, the perpetrator drove back to his parents' home in Everett. There, he began to show signs of extreme panic and confessed to his mother that he had committed a horrific crime. Faced with the gravity of the situation, his mother immediately took possession of the weapon and persuaded her son to surrender. Later that same evening, Du Phuong went to the police station and accepted arrest. After more than a year of preparation, the trial of Du Phuong Nguyen officially took place at the Snohomish County Superior Court. In October 2021, just before the trial began, Du Phuong accepted a plea agreement with the prosecution. He admitted to first-degree murder in the death of Thon Vai Lee and 2 counts of first-degree assault, one with a domestic violence enhancement for seriously injuring Thai Trun and Thien Vuong. In exchange, prosecutors agreed to recommend a sentence lower than the maximum possible penalty. At the sentencing hearing on November 5, 2021, Du Phuong Nguyen appeared in a dark gray prison uniform, sitting silently beside his attorney and a Vietnamese interpreter. After hearing arguments from both sides, Judge Ederin Okoloko sentenced Du Phuong Nguyen to 45 years and 6 months in prison. This sentence was considered to be at the lower end of the standard range for the series of crimes he had committed. The court accepted this recommendation as part of the agreement between the prosecution and the defense. Most importantly, Du Phuong's decision to plead guilty spared the victims and witnesses from having to relive their painful memories in open court. At the conclusion of the hearing, Du Phuong was transferred into the Washington State prison system to begin serving his sentence and facing the consequences of his actions. Although the case of Du Phuong Nguyen has officially come to a close, its impact continues to linger within the local Vietnamese community and among residents of Edmonds. It stands as a heartbreaking tragedy, illustrating the devastating consequences of domestic conflicts when they are not recognized and addressed in time. Following the incident, the Edmonds Police Department conducted a serious review of its procedures for handling domestic conflict cases. Authorities emphasized that no threat should ever be taken lightly, whether conveyed through text messages or spoken words. In this case, the suspect had issued very clear warnings, yet due to fear and confusion, the victims did not promptly report the escalating danger to law enforcement. According to experts, this case also reflects a common psychological barrier among victims of abuse. They often feel hesitant, ashamed, or fearful of the consequences, causing them to delay seeking protection from authorities. From the community's perspective, following the tragedy, the city of Edmonds took meaningful steps to honor the victim. In November 2022, the City Council discussed placing a memorial bench dedicated to Thon Vai Lee in a local park. Than V's story has been mentioned in numerous news articles and Vietnamese American forums as a wake-up call. It has prompted organizations that advocate for women's rights to strengthen outreach efforts within Asian communities and to provide support hotlines in native languages. In fact, statistics show that immigrant women face one of the highest risks of severe domestic violence. From this heartbreaking tragedy, what do you think we can do to help someone escape a dangerous situation while still ensuring our own safety? On the afternoon of the 18th day of March, 1992, Anaheim, California's 911 dispatch received a report of gunfire at Melrose Abbey Memorial Park. Located right beside the busy Santa Ana freeway during rush hour, the caller was a cemetery worker who sounded frantic as he said he had just heard gunshots and saw 2 men collapse on the grass. Anaheim police and an ambulance rushed to the scene immediately. The first investigators to arrive felt the tense, mysterious atmosphere hanging over the cemetery. 2 bodies lay sprawled beside 2 adjacent graves, blood soaking into the bright green lawn. The The scene was cold, and there was no suspect in sight. Just minutes earlier, someone had been kneeling, paying respects, and burning incense. Now only the traces of violence remained. Another cemetery employee, trembling, told police that he had seen 2 male figures and 1 female figure running between the headstones and disappearing toward the rear gate right after the final shots. The area was immediately sealed off, and officers began a preliminary on-site examination. This was a quiet burial ground, and these 2 graves belonged to the Dung brothers figures who were anything but ordinary in Asian underworld circles. On the grass beside the graves, the 2 victims had already died, each with multiple gunshot wounds. Their bodies were slumped to one side, suggesting that when they were shot, they may have been kneeling or bent low. Around them lay 7 to 8 shell casings. There were no other signs of a struggle or physical fight. Everything happened too quickly and too decisively. Based on their physical features, both victims appeared to be Vietnamese, not locals. And the grave they had come to visit also belonged to Vietnamese brothers who had once lived in Northern California. Could these unfortunate men have been friends or close associates of the Dung family? The crime scene investigators' initial assessment was that this was a double hit with clear signs of a gang execution, because the killer acted with professional, calculated precision. Choosing a cemetery as the location was an unusual decision, both bold and symbolic. The cemetery worker who witnessed part of what happened said that about 1 hour before the shooting, an unfamiliar black BMW drove slowly around the cemetery, then parked near the edge of the Dung family burial area. Shortly afterward, a Vietnamese woman in her middle years approached and made small talk with the worker, asking a few casual questions. Minutes after she walked away, he suddenly heard a series of sharp gunshots coming from the direction of the Dung graves. He spun around and was horrified to see a man with a firearm firing rapidly at 2 people who were kneeling at the grave. One of the victims staggered to his feet, but immediately collapsed again when the attacker fired a final, fatal shot. Everything happened too fast. The worker only caught a glimpse of the black car speeding away and could not make out the license plate. However, he and several colleagues confirmed one critical detail: that Vietnamese woman had been standing and talking with the 2 victims at the gravesite not long before the attack. That meant she knew them and had been with them. She was not a random stranger who happened to be there. That detail sent a chill down investigators' spines. If the killer used someone familiar to approach and lure the targets into a trap, then this was clearly a carefully planned execution, possibly involving betrayal. The investigators' eyes briefly swept over the headstones of the Dung brothers' men who had once wielded power in the underworld, only to be taken out themselves. Could their deaths years earlier be connected to this newest tragedy? That question became the starting point of a mystery-filled investigation. Based on identification documents found on the victims, police initially identified them as Anh H, Cuong Duc Phuong, 26 years old, and Ong Thin Xuan Nguyen, 41 years old, both residents of San Francisco. Tattoos on their bodies immediately caught investigators' attention. They quickly photographed the tattoos and sent the images to the San Francisco Police Department's gang unit. As expected, the results suggested the tattoos resembled markings associated with the Hung Fur Gang, a familiar name in SFPD organized crime files. This also explained why the 2 victims had appeared at the graves of Dong Quoc Dung 28 and Hung Quoc Dung 29, because those 2 men had been high-ranking leaders of the gang. The next lead came from the local Vietnamese community. After learning that a homicide had occurred at her son's gravesite, Ba En Hung Le, the mother of Hung and Dung, contacted police. She stated that earlier that afternoon, 2 of her son's friends from San Francisco had stopped by her home for about 15 minutes, then said goodbye and went to the cemetery to burn incense. This suggested that Cuong and Teen had traveled all the way to Southern California to visit the grave, likely for the first death anniversary of the Dung brothers, only to meet a tragic end. As police dug deeper, they learned that both Cuong Duc Phuong and Thin Xuan Nguyen were tied to the Vietnamese underworld in San Francisco in the early 1990s. They belonged to 2 different generations. Cuong was still very young, born in the mid-1960s and raised within the newly arrived Vietnamese American community, while Thin was already in his 40s. part of the first wave of immigrants who came after 1975. Despite the large age gap, fate brought them together as partners and comrades within the Hung Four criminal organization. According to police records, the Hung Four gang recruited people of all ages, as long as they had a reputation on the street and remained loyal to the group. Krung Fung was described as a tough, hardened young man who had been involved in multiple thefts and robberies, as well as weapons possession, since he was barely over 18. Thin Nguyen, much older, was respectfully called An Thin by younger members. He was believed to have been involved in underworld circles in Vietnam before coming to the United States, bringing experience and connections that helped the gang operate smoothly. Within Hung Four, Quoc Fung and Thin Nguyen functioned as right-hand men to the boss, Hung Quoc Dung. They were actively involved in illegal operations across California, from armed robberies in the Bay Area to protection rackets tied to illegal gambling dens in Orange County. Their recklessness and loyalty earned the boss's trust. In addition, their bond with the leader's family was also close. Quoc Fung and Tin En Nguyen cared for the Hung Dung brothers like family. Despite their underworld reputation, in everyday life, Quoc and Thin were relatively discreet and rarely flashy. Outsiders only saw them gathering at pho restaurants and coffee shops frequented by Vietnamese locals, never suspecting the bloody crimes behind them. Those close to them said Quoc Fung had a hot temper and a volatile streak, often starting fights or making shows of force to settle conflicts. In contrast, Thin Nguyen was older, calmer, and more calculating, seen as the group's strategist in certain operations. This senior-junior pair worked well together, forming a kind of alliance within the gang. So after Boss Hung, Quoc Dung and his brother were killed in the early 1990s, Quoc Fung and Thin Nguyen remained close to the family, partly out of loyalty, and perhaps also to maintain influence within the gang. The fact that they traveled from San Francisco to Anaheim to visit the graves of their sworn brothers showed a rare kind of devotion. Identifying the victims became a major turning point, opening the door to a deeper, organized crime investigation. At the same time, police focused on extracting as much detail as possible from the on-scene witness. The cemetery worker gave a fairly detailed description of the suspicious woman who had approached him. She spoke with a Vietnamese accent, appeared to be around 40 years old, had an average build, and dressed simply. She had proactively approached and chatted with the employee before the shooting, which suggested a deliberate attempt to distract him. In addition, other cemetery workers revealed an unexpected detail. They had seen shady transactions, possibly drug deals, taking place right at the Dung brothers' graves several times a week. On certain days, someone would come to place flowers and burn incense, but at the same time discreetly exchange small, unknown packages before quickly leaving. So had the cemetery been exploited as a meeting point for an underground operation? Did Quoc Fung and Thin Nguyen come to pay respects this time while also handling some other business? Or had other gang members been using their own leader's resting place as an illegal rendezvous spot? Although there was no clear proof yet, this was still a direction investigators had to consider while reconstructing the case. The cemetery killings no longer looked like an isolated incident. There was a strong possibility they were part of a bloody chain of events tied to the Hung Four gang. With the victims' identities confirmed, the investigation officially moved into the phase of hunting the perpetrators and decoding the mystery behind this brazen execution. Recognizing how serious and complex the case was, the Anaheim Police Department quickly formed a task force in coordination with the San Francisco Police Department and the FBI. Inspector Chet Berry of Anaheim Police openly assessed that the killings likely stemmed from internal conflict or a clash between gangs. More specifically, police developed two main theories. Theory one was internal betrayal. The possibility was that this was an internal purge within the Hung Four gang. After boss Hung Quoc Dung died, the gang may have splintered, with factions fighting for control. Quoc Fung and Thin Nguyen, as trusted men of the old boss, could have been obstacles to anyone seeking to seize power. Killing them right at the old boss's grave carried symbolic weight, a message that Hung Quoc Dung's era was over, and anyone loyal to him would share the same fate. Moreover, Only insiders would know their grave visiting routine well enough to set up such a precise ambush. The attacker also used a woman who knew the victims as bait, pointing to betrayal from within. This theory was strengthened by information from San Francisco police, indicating that after the Dung brothers' deaths, the Hung Far gang went through significant upheaval. Some members defected to other groups, while others quietly retaliated against one another. Theory 2 was an outside enemy. Hung Far had made enemies everywhere, so rivals seeking to compete for profits were not uncommon. California's Asian organized crime history also recorded bloody retaliations between gangs fighting over underground gambling and drug markets. Hung Far had once collaborated with a Chinese criminal organization called Wo Hop 2, but the alliance was not stable. Some information suggested that Wo Hop 2 wanted to absorb Vietnamese gangs under its control, creating hidden tensions with hardline members of Hung Far. In addition, other Vietnamese gangs such as the V-Boys were also active in San Jose and Little Saigon, so it was possible they wanted to eliminate Hung Far to expand their own influence. The choice to strike on the first death anniversary of the deceased boss killing his close associates right at his grave suggested the killer wanted to send a deeply intimidating message. With two broad investigative directions open, police had to gather and analyze evidence meticulously to test each theory. First, the physical evidence from the scene was sent for forensic analysis. The shell casings were identified as .380 caliber, commonly used in semi-automatic handguns. Fingerprint checks around the graves produced no clear results because it was a public area with far too many overlapping traces. The suspicious black BMW could not be traced immediately, but police issued a local patrol alert with the vehicle's description. They suspected it might have been stolen. Officers searched abandoned lots in suburban areas for a dumped BMW, but it appeared the killers had already disappeared, following a well-planned escape. Meanwhile, forensic work on the victims' bodies helped confirm the sequence of events. Both victims had multiple gunshot wounds to the chest and back. The younger victim, Kyung Fung, had a gunshot wound to the back of the head, indicating he was executed at close range after he had already fallen. This matched the account that the shooter kept firing until the victims were completely down. The firing distance was close, around 1 to 2 meters, and the clean wound pattern suggested the killer was highly proficient. Ballistics trajectory and the positions of the bodies indicated the two victims were kneeling side by side with their backs to the shooter when they were shot. Most likely, they had been bowing in front of the grave and did not see the attacker approach from behind. This clue strengthened the element of surprise. The killer may have lured the victims into bowing to the grave, lowering their guard, then signaled the attack from behind. It was a ruthless and cunning plan. As for witnesses, the cemetery worker's statement was considered credible. The details he provided were consistent with the scene and the autopsy findings. Moreover, several other cemetery employees also confirmed seeing the woman speaking with the victims earlier. Even so, no one was able to identify her or remember the license plate because everything happened so fast. Police created a sketch of the woman based on the descriptions and cross-checked criminal records for any possible matches. Unfortunately, files on the Hung Far gang were dominated by male suspects, with very little information on women connected to the group. Still, a few names were considered, such as Hung Quoc Dung's former girlfriend, the widow of Dung Quoc Dung, or certain female bosses who led women tasked with messaging, lookout duties, and surveillance. Each theory was considered, but there was not enough evidence to charge anyone. Police could only be sure that the woman was not an unwitting pawn she had been involved from the beginning, because some residents reported seeing a strange woman sitting inside the black car parked not far from Ba Lei's home before the first murders. At the same time, police interviewed the victims' relatives and friends in San Francisco. Detectives at the San Francisco Police Department questioned members of the Vietnamese community in Tenderloin and Richmond, areas where the Hung Far gang often appeared. Most people were fearful and tight-lipped, and some hesitated to cooperate out of fear of retaliation. Still, from scattered fragments of conversation, investigators pieced together a rough picture. After the deaths of the Hung brothers, the Hung Far gang had splintered into several factions. Some younger, more aggressive members wanted to avenge the boss, suspecting that someone inside the gang had betrayed their leaders. Among them, Quoc Phung was repeatedly mentioned as the loudest voice calling for a manhunt to find whoever had killed their boss. In contrast, another faction led by a figure nicknamed Ba X pushed for submitting to Wo Hop Tu for protection, choosing to set aside Hung's personal vendettas. Tension simmered between the two camps. Then Quoc Phung and Thin Nguyen were suddenly executed. That led many lower-level members to believe the submission faction had moved to crush the loyalists, clearing the way for a new direction. This rumor had not been verified, but it aligned with the internal purge theory police had already considered. Police also contacted the FBI, which was investigating Asian organized crime in California. The FBI provided additional intelligence, suggesting that Hung Fer had recently been linked to violent debt collection operations and illegal gambling, and may have clashed with the V-Boys gang in San Jose over territorial profits. In addition, the FBI shared an unconfirmed report that Wo Hop Tu had taken out Hung Quoc Dung because he resisted profit sharing from gambling operations. If that was true, then the cemetery hit squad may have been directed by Wo Hop Tu to wipe out the remaining loyalists. However, this was still only an inference, and hard evidence was lacking. Another key investigative step was to review the earlier murders of the Dung brothers for potential connections. Police compared the bullets recovered from the Quoc Phung Thi Nguyen scene with bullets removed from Dung Quoc Dung's body in 1990. The results did not match. There was virtually no CCTV coverage around the cemetery. Investigators were left to comb through case files to see whether anyone had threatened the victims in the past. In San Francisco, they discovered that Quoc Phung had previously been hunted down and shot at while driving in 1991, though fortunately no one was hit. That incident was suspected to involve a Chinese gang, but there was no proof. As for Thi Nguyen, he had been arrested in an illegal gambling case in 1988, but managed to avoid a serious sentence. These details painted a turbulent underworld life, but still offered no direct link to the current case. As the investigation dragged on, leads grew cold, and the case risked slipping into a dead end. Police tried a range of special tactics, from building an offender profile to placing undercover inquiries within the community, but everything remained unclear. The investigation stretched into the following months, and by the end of 1992, no arrests had been made. The case was classified as an open investigation, meaning it would remain active if new information surfaced, but it was no longer pursued with a large dedicated force. The search for the truth had to pause, leaving investigators with deep frustration and unfinished questions. To this day, the real perpetrators in the Hung Fer cemetery killings at Melrose Abbey have not been officially identified. However, based on investigative findings and professional assessment, a rough profile of the killers has emerged with the following key traits. First, witness statements and evidence all point to a three-person team of Vietnamese or Asian descent, 2 men and 1 woman. They were likely between 20 and 40 years old, familiar with Vietnamese language and culture. The group operated in an organized manner with clearly assigned roles. The woman served as a distraction, 1 man carried out the shooting, and the other provided support either as the getaway driver or as backup in case the victims needed to be restrained. This kind of coordination is commonly seen in professional gang operations, meaning they were not amateur criminals, but were most likely connected to a larger organized crime group. Although no one has been caught for confirmation, police believed based on the execution style method that the shooter had prior experience using firearms and may have carried out similar jobs before. He calmly closed in and fired multiple accurate shots at close range, showing the skill of a seasoned hitman. He did not hesitate when 1 victim tried to stand and continued firing until the man collapsed. That coldness reflected a ruthless criminal mindset, with no doubt or remorse. It matched the profiles of many Asian underworld assassins, men who showed not the slightest mercy to their targets. The second male suspect, likely acting as the driver or assistant, also reflected the group's careful planning, positioning someone in advance to ensure a clean escape. The woman, however, remained the most intriguing unknown. If she knew the victims and even went with them to the grave, then her role was crucial. She may have been a lure sent by the mastermind to approach early and build trust with the victims. Or she may have been tied to Hung Four or a rival gang, a well-connected female operator able to infiltrate deeply as an insider. Typically, in Vietnamese gangs, women rarely participate directly in underworld executions, but they may serve as scouts, decoys, or facilitators. The fact that she distracted the cemetery employee showed she was composed and able to act convincingly to mislead those around her. Crime files from that era also indicate that some Vietnamese women played active roles in organized crime operations, often as wives, sisters, or close girlfriends of gang figures, meaning they understood gang activity from the inside. It is possible the woman in this case fit that profile as well, someone closely connected to the mastermind and completely loyal, willing to assist in a murder plot. If this was an internal purge, then the shooters could have been former subordinates under Hung Pho, just like Fung and Nguyen. That would make the case even more tragic. Men who once stood side by side, now turning on each other with brutal violence. If the killers belonged to a rival gang, then the relationship was already hostile, and they saw the victims as obstacles that had to be removed. Either way, the common point is that the perpetrators had to understand the victims' habits and schedule well enough to plan an ambush. In short, even without catching them red-handed, the killer's profile points to an organized Vietnamese crew, scheming, cold-blooded, and reckless. They may have come from Hung Four itself, or from another Vietnamese gang, with deep underworld experience and a clear understanding of both allies and enemies. They were willing to betray and eliminate trusted insiders to achieve their goals. And after the crime, they stayed disciplined, covering their tracks, avoiding bragging, and leaving no loose ends. The fact that from 1992 until today, not a single direct lead has surfaced suggests they hid extremely well. It is also possible they fled California immediately after the hit or disappeared into Vietnamese communities elsewhere, perhaps even returning to Vietnam or fleeing to a third country. That is a major challenge, and one reason this case remains unsolved. What matters is that regardless of the killer's ultimate motive, after the murders, the Hung Four gang essentially collapsed. Remaining members either walked away or joined other gangs to survive. The name Hung Four gradually vanished from the criminal landscape, surviving only in police files as a grim legend. More than 3 decades have passed since that massacre at the gravesite shocked the entire community. To this day, the Hung Four case at the Anaheim Cemetery has never been solved, becoming one of the biggest mysteries surrounding Vietnamese organized crime in the United States. In your opinion, who could have been behind this purge? And what was the real truth behind that grave visit? Share your thoughts with Vietnamese case files in the comments.